Hey guys, it's been a while since I've posted a video. We've had a weird winter this year. It was the 7th least snowiest winter on record. So I haven't posted a video in a while, and there's not a whole lot of yard work to be doing right now either. It's the beginning of April, so there's no snow in sight at all. The grass isn't growing yet, trees aren't really growing yet. So we're in kind of a lull as far as yard work. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a little maintenance. So these are suspension links out of my Santa Cruz Hightower mountain bike. And what we're going to do is pull out all of these pressed in bearings, and then we're going to press in new bearings. This video will be useful for people who have Santa Cruz bikes, but it's also useful just for anybody who has to pull out pressed in bearings and replace them, because it's pretty similar process no matter what you're doing it on. All right, so let me show you the two different tools I have to get this job done. So this is the bearing puller kit. I bought this one on eBay for a little under $40. It comes with 8 different sizes, and I can show you how those work. But the short is that the black piece connects to the bearing, and then you screw on the silver piece, and you use it like a reverse hammer that pulls the bearing out. And then to put the new bearings back in, this is the bearing press tool. Now all this is a scrap of threaded rod that I had left over from other projects, like building my clamp holder that bolts onto the ceiling. So I went to the hardware store and I got a few different size nuts and a bunch of different washers, including some plastic nylon washers and some spacers. And you use this with some wrenches and some sockets to press the new bearings into the spots they go. And again, it doesn't make a lot of sense now, but once I'm doing it, I'll show you and it will make a lot of sense. And like I said, this is good for mountain bikes, but anything that takes press-in sealed cartridge bearings, it's going to be a very similar process of putting them in and pulling them out. All right, I'm going to get to it. All right, I'm going to start with the upper link, and I'm going to start with the smaller bearings at the top of that. So I'm going to grab the tool that fits in there as snug as possible. So this part goes in the middle of the bearing, and then you tighten this other piece, and it actually spreads out these fingers and grabs the bearing. You need to use a wrench to do that. So you can see this one screwed into this one, and it caused the fingers there to spread out. They grab onto the bearing. Now, you take this big old piece, you screw it in. Now this is my very first time using this. I've never used this before, but I'm still going to tell you the same piece of advice that I saw on multiple other videos, which is when you're doing this, watch your hand, because if your hand ends up falling over here a little bit as you're hammering this, you're going to bleed. It's going to suck. So watch your hand, and as long as you're like this, it should be fine. So you can see how this works. This handle's pretty heavy, and I'm just sliding it down, and it's just going to yank on the bearings until they pop out. All right, well, let's try that again. Okay, I'm having trouble with the small ones, so I'm going to move on to the big ones first, see if I can get those out, and then if I can, I'll go back to the small ones. All right, let's see what happens here. All right, success. The bearings came right out. So let's repeat that, and then we'll get back to the small ones. All right, so we got the larger bearing out of this link, and now we're going to flip it over and do the larger bearing on the other side. Let's see if we can pop this one off. Oops. All right, came right out. So one of the reasons I really wanted to go with this style of bearing puller is because I like that you're holding the item in your hand. These are made out of aluminum, and some parts of it are pretty thin. Mountain bike stuff is really strong in the way it's designed to take forces, but it can be really weak if you're putting forces on it in an unusual direction. So with this, I'm holding it in my hand, and so it's really just the mass of the handle here that's putting all the force on here. You're not putting it in a vise and squeezing it in weird ways and doing any sort of weird stuff with it. All right, let me take this bearing off and we'll revisit the smaller ones. So the bearings from the upper link actually feel buttery smooth. Santa Cruz will give you a full set of bearings every year for your bike. So even though these top ones feel totally fine, I'm still going to replace them because they're about 6 years old. I know that the bearings in the lower link are really beat up and they do not feel smooth. And that makes sense if you look at the way the bike is built. When you're hitting the ground hard, pretty much all the force is going through the lower link, not the upper link. The upper link just kind of keeps the two halves of the frame together, keeps the shock lined up, but it doesn't really hold the significant forces that the lower link does. All right, I'm going to try to give you a real close-up view of what's going on here. So you tighten this piece into this piece, and it has a spike on it that goes up into here and spreads the four arms apart. And you can see the the four arms grab the edge of the bearing, and that's what it's pulling with. But it's kind of not working so great with the small one. All right, things are getting a little crazy, but here's what I have come up with. So the small bearing is inset a little bit into the black aluminum, so there's a little bit of a lip. So this bolt here, you can see there's not much threading past the nut, so it fits in there just to hold it in place. And it's not connected to the top piece at all. These washers are just sitting there. So when I hammer on this, it's going to put 100% of the force into the bearing and nothing into the black piece, either of the two black pieces of aluminum. That should loosen it enough to pop it out, you know, just a millimeter or so. All right, just going to give it some taps and see what happens. All right, that moved it. Aha, success. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. It's a little easy to install because the other ones are gone. So the important thing is that when I'm hammering it, I'm actually holding the left side up a little bit so that this surface is perfectly flush with the workbench. Because again, I don't want to put any forces on the aluminum chunk. I only want forces hitting the bearings themselves. Yep, and they're coming up. As soon as they move at all, you can just pull it up and tap it. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to clean up the link before I put the new bearings in, and I'm going to clean it with rubbing alcohol, not degreaser, because the degreaser will leave a film, and that film could start to eat away at the new grease, and I don't want that. I always get annoyed when I'm watching how-to videos on bike stuff, how they only clean things for a second and then they're magically spotless because they must cut out minutes and minutes and minutes of just boring cleaning and wiping. And I'm going to too. So now I'm just getting the parts ready. The kit comes with the bearings for the top and the bottom. So I'm just getting the ones for the top out. And there's also a spacer in there that you need to match up. That looks right. So I'm going to put a little film of marine grease, which is really thick grease, on the insides where the bearing cartridges sit. And that's not to help the bearings themselves because these are sealed cartridges. That's so that well, for one thing, it's so that the cartridges will slip in easier, but it's also just to prevent noise because these bearings are going to get beat on for years and eventually they might start wiggling and creaking is the worst on a mountain bike. So a little bit of grease in there should hopefully keep it nice and quiet forever. All right, so let me get my press ready. So now I'm going to put the combination of washers and spacers in here that I want. One key is the part that's missing from the press is actually a socket. It's a socket that happens to be just the exact same diameter as the bearing itself. And you need this because you only want to press on the outer edge of the bearing, not the center, when you're installing. Pressing on the center can mess up the tension and mess up the bearings. So I don't have sockets specifically for this. I just pulled them out of my actual socket set and I made sure they were the right size. So you're just going to put that right on there, and that just becomes part of the tool. Then I'm going to, after I grease it up, I'm going to put it through like that. Put on some more washers, including the nylon washer. And the nylon washer, it's basically just a soft plastic. And that is so I don't scratch the aluminum when I'm tightening it down. So only on one side plastic is going to be touching the link, and on the other side the bearing's just going to be going right in. Then you put a nut on each end and tighten it, and hopefully it works. All right, now I'm just going to put a blob of grease on each part here. I also have a boat, a small one, that's very old, almost as old as me. Actually, I have a video about it. But the funny thing is, and the reason I bring it up, is because I definitely use marine grease on my bicycles a lot more often than I use it on my boat. The problem I'm having is the aluminum is so smooth that the grease isn't really sticking. All right, so what I have here is a nut, a couple of washers. This is a socket that's almost the exact same diameter as the bearing, maybe a tiny, tiny bit smaller. Directly next to the black aluminum is the bearing itself. Then the black aluminum is the link. Then we have the nylon washer that's just going to protect the link from getting scratched. A couple more washers, metal washers, and then another nut. So as I tighten this up, it should squeeze the bearing right in there. So you can feel it once it bottoms out and it's in all the way. It goes from very easy to tighten to extremely difficult. And then you know you're done. So let me undo this and we'll see how it looks. So it came out really good. It's set in there the exact same amount all the way around, which is maybe 0.5 millimeter deep. It's in all the way. I'll have to wipe off all the grease when I'm done, but that worked really good. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side and then the same thing at the bottom of this link. I'm just going to tighten it in. So if you're going to make one of these homemade like this one, you probably don't want to go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's because they don't really sell nuts and bolts and washers the way you need them for this. You probably want to go to a local hardware store, and you're probably going to spend at least a half hour in there pulling a million different washers in and out, finding just the individual ones that you want. That's what I did, but I have a hardware store near me that has a very good selection of loose nuts and bolts. All right, that looks great. They both look like they're set in perfectly all the way. Nice and smooth, no scratches on the aluminum. Like I said, everything is kind of covered in grease a little bit, but once it's done, I'll give it a better wipe down and then probably cover it in grease again anyway when I actually install it on the bike. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the bigger bearings. I'm going to do one first, then I have to stick the spacer in between there, and then the other side. All right, I'm all set up to do the bigger bearing. So again, I have a nut here, a pair of small washers, a pair of bigger washers. I'm doubling up all the washers so that they don't get bent or they're less likely to bend. Here's the socket that's the right size for the bearing, and you can just see the bearing sticking out there. Oops, here we go. You can see the bearing sticking out a little bit. It partially sets in, but it's not fully set. Then on the other side, I have the bigger nylon washer to protect all the aluminum, or yeah, all the painted aluminum there. Some bigger washers to protect the nylon washer, and then a nut. So I'm going to tighten this down, and it should work just as easy as it did a minute ago. Oh, that's actually going in easier. I like it. All right, I'm gonna have to do that over again. The bearing's going in a little crooked. I wish I got that on camera. I didn't think it was gonna work. This bearing was crooked, so it was sticking out a lot on one side, and it was close to being flush on the other side. So I just hit it with my rubber mallet a bunch of times, and it actually went nice and flush all the way around. So I'm gonna put the thing back together and crank it in nice and tight. All right, that also came out really good. If I had kept going when it was crooked, that could have definitely caused some problems. So you just keep an eye on that. You want the bearing to go in evenly, because if it's crooked, it's wider and it can stretch out the hole. Actually, before I get the other one set up, I have to put in the spacer. So I'm just gonna drop it in there. And okay, I'm actually gonna try something a little different. I'm going to try to tap it in a little first before I put the compression tool on there. Oh, that works great. That's way easier. Because with the threaded rod tool, it can be hard to get it started. I'm not a huge fan of ratcheting box wrenches. I have regular simple box wrenches, and I have sockets that ratchet. So it seems like kind of a waste having ratcheting box wrenches. But this is one of those rare instances when it actually would be very nice to have one of those. All of the bearings, you can feel they're super buttery smooth. So the upper link is ready to go. The lower link might be a little more complicated. It also might be a little easier because there's no small bearings. All right, I've got the puller tool installed on the first bearing of the lower link. And the first thing I can notice is that when I spin the tool, it's rotating the bearing and you can feel it grinding. So these bearings are in really rough shape, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm just gonna try to pull it out just like I did before. All right, here we go. Here we go, came right out. All right, I've got the tool threaded in on the opposite bearing to the one I just pulled. Put the handle on and yank this one out. This one's a little more stubborn than the last one. Oh, it might be coming finally. Here it is. All right, I've got bearing number 3 set up and ready to go. So yep, it's coming. Cool. All right, the fourth, last set of bearings. I'm gonna put the tool in there and lock it in place. So I can definitely understand why a bike shop would charge you $100 or so to do this, because it's actually very time consuming. I'm a little surprised, how long it's taking. Jeez, this one's in there really tight. It's actually hurting my hand. It's hitting so hard.
Before you accuse me of having wimpy hands, just know that I've edited out most of the hammering. There was so much hammering non-stop.
Ah, finally. It just flew across the room. All right, the thing that's different about the lower link bearings is they're not actually fully sealed. They're open on the interior side and they're only sealed on the exterior side. And the reason for that is because the lower link actually has a grease fitting on it. So you can hook up a grease gun and pump the grease in, and it comes out into the open face of the bearings. I don't have a grease gun, so what I'm going to do is clean this out as thoroughly as I can. And then when I install the new bearings, I'm going to pack the open side as much as I can with fresh grease. I'm going to pack the inside of this, the inside of the cup, with grease. And then when I press the new bearings in, hopefully everything stays in put. All right, now I'm going to try to pack these bearings with more grease. So these are the new replacement ones. They're solid metal on one side and then they're exposed on the other. And they're pre-filled with grease, but they're not completely filled because they're expecting you to use the grease fitting to finish it off, which I don't have. So I'm going to put grease on my finger. I'm going to try to just jam it in there. Yeah, doing grease like this is always messy. It's always kind of miserable, but this is the way you do it. Or I suppose I could have went to Harbor Freight and bought a grease gun. That might be what I do next time because this sucks. All right, let me speed this up because this is boring. All right, now I'm going to put the grease in the link itself. I'm going to do the same thing I did before where I put a film inside the cup that the bearing sits in. I'm also going to try to fill those inner channels with grease. That shouldn't be too hard. It should be messy, but it shouldn't be too hard. Super messy, but it's very greased up. Okay, so before I thread up the compression rod, I'm going to try to use the, wow. Okay, these go right in. I was not expecting that. I was going to hammer them in with the mallet, but I don't even need to. All right, so I'm going to put this together. That one went in crooked. Crap. All right, that was kind of ugly. I had to put the nylon washer, the link, and the socket in a vise and squeeze it really hard to get it to straighten out the bearing. But the bearing still turns freely, so I don't think I did any damage, but hopefully the rest of them go a little easier. So now I'm just going to tighten this up just to make sure it's in there all the way. And then I'll move on to the next one. That was rough, but it worked, as you can see. So these ones are set in a lot deeper than the other ones, and that's because they have these little plastic rings that seat in there. I'm going to wait to the end to put those in though. I'm going to put the spacer in. I'm going to put the bearing back. I'm going to thread it up again. This one started to try to get crooked, but then I could feel it straighten out. Now it's going in a lot easier. So these two bearings both look good. They're both moving nice and smooth. So now repeat the process. All right, On to the next one. Put it in there. Thread on the tool. Washers. This one's going in a little crooked too. And the top link was a lot easier than the bottom link. Alright, I'm gonna have to do the same thing and use the vise to straighten this out because it got really crooked. Okay, so here's what it looks like in the vise. I really don't like doing it this way, but don't have much choice. There we go. Alright, so it's straight. I'm going to use the regular tool for the rest of it.
So I'm going to save a little time here and just tell you that the bearings went in crooked again on this attempt, so I had to go and bring it over to the vise again.
Just felt it move. All the spacers, all the bearings, everything looks good. Everything seems to be set in an equal amount. So the last thing I'm going to do is force in these little plastic, I don't even know what you'd call them, bushings maybe, kinda. Here we go. This link is good to go. Rotating nice and smooth. The funny thing is, you're only going to get a few degrees of movement out of this when it's in the bike. It's not like it's spinning like a wheel, but it's only moving a little bit, but it's moving that little bit constantly. All right, well, that actually was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be, but in the end, it all came out good. So tomorrow, I'm going to throw these on the bike, throw the bike together. I still have a lot of other work to do. I'm doing a big spring maintenance on the bike, so I don't have any video of me riding the bike with these new links that I can show, but I can show you some old video of me riding the bike before it needed new bearings, and you can just pretend that.
If you recognize any of these spots and can name them, definitely leave a comment down below. I'm curious if anybody knows any of the places I ride. Few programming notes for you. I still have to cut up that large tree in the back of my yard that fell. I'm going to make a special project video out of that and post it soon. And the grass is starting to wake up, so lawn mowing will be just around the corner, and I'll be posting videos every week again. Until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.
Oh my God.